Welcome to PANELISM, the podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf and more. I'm Taylor Trask. Hey, Happy New Year. It's 2020. We're finally here. We had a little bit of a break, so if you've wondered where we've been, Todd and I needed several weeks off. We had a very busy, good but busy 2019, and I think we needed a rest. And we also wanted to plan a little bit. You'll notice starting on this episode, we are launching another new feature called PANELISM Fireside Chats. And we've teased for a while now wanting to interview folks and get some different voices on the show. And we've done that in the past, but we're going to do it a lot more, I think, frequently going forward. And we'll talk to people like creators and artists and comic shop owners and comic fans, just like our first guest today, Frey. Now, Frank is the space captain here at Epicentral Co-working in downtown Colorado Springs. And full disclosure, we're currently recording from my studio at Epicentral. So definitely, if you're in the Springs, come check it out. Springs residents will also know Frank, though, from this series of stickers of his face that appear everywhere around town. And we'll cover that probably more in a little bit. Frank and I have had many a side chat about comics as we've walked around the space, and I thought, of all the people to bring in as kind of the first guest of this fireside chat thing, what better person than a comics fan, somebody who's we've chatted a bunch. I wanted to hear more, and I would love to dive more into it. So, without further ado, Frank Frey, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for letting me be on here.
Oh, of course, man. This is fun, and it's one of those things where the more we can do, Todd and I often record remotely. He's in San Diego, I'm here in the Springs, and it's always fun to get people in the studio and chat some. We're here on a Sunday morning too, so you've got your coffee, I've got my water.
For sure, it's a great way to spend a Sunday morning.
We're good to go.
And your studio is great. You have a lot of really cool nostalgic toys, and your posters are awesome. You've got a really nice setup in here.
Thank you. Yeah, we were chatting before. I have a laser tag cap with a sensor on the top that you'd noticed before, that not a lot of people know what that is or remember even laser tag from the 80s. It was one of those I think it was a cartoon at one point, and then it was like a cartoon toy line launched, and then
I do think I remember a cartoon.
The toys were really good. I mean, everybody had the guns were cool, but then I was telling you earlier, the holy grail was the vest. And the vest was this, not many people had the vest. And so when you saw it, in the wild, you're like, oh my God, there it is.
Yeah, I think it was a little cost prohibitive for most families.
Yeah. A lot of those really cool 80s toys were you'd see the one kid in your class had everything. And then everybody else was like, I got the one, the other one I remember. Do you remember California Raisins?
Yeah.
The California Raisins toys. So I grew up in a small little town, but in first grade, the social capital was how many California Raisins toys you had on your desk. And so you'd walk in and you'd see kids with 5 and 6, and I had 2, and that was because Hardee's, I think it was Hardee's that had them, but you had to buy them separately, and for whatever reason everybody was taking their parents to Hardee's to get these toys. It was kind of one of those,
because it was the 80s and they were marketing everything.
Oh God, yeah. And it was my class was ridiculous. They had all kinds of crazy things like that. Well, I wanted to start by, I guess, let our listeners know a little bit about you, what you are, what you do, and any of your any interests, and then how you got into comics, and I guess what led you to appreciating the art form, as it were.
So I'm originally from Chicago. I moved out here kind of early on, probably in second grade, but then moved to St. Louis rather, a year later, and then moved back to Chicago, and then kind of flip-flopped back and forth between the Springs and Chicago several times, and then finally came back in my late 20s, mid 20s, and then have stayed in the Springs since then. For a while, I was bartending at the Blue Star at Nosh, and then after that, Lisa had opened Epicentral, and had been open for about 2 years. Her original partner, Hannah, who had opened the space with her, was leaving, so she needed someone to help kind of just run the space. Asked if I wanted to do it because I was leaving Nosh. I was leaving bartending at that time. So I said, sure, I'll give it a shot. And then I've kind of been here since, really. So
Nice.
It's been about 5 years, 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that I've been
That's a
here.
good little run.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I really enjoy the space. I enjoy the interaction I get with people. It really is. It's I don't know. I think my background has been hospitality, you know, and I think that I get to exercise that here. You know, I'm really just a bartender. I just don't make any drinks except for Thursdays at our happy hour. So, yeah, you know, and I mean, you get to have great conversations, right? You run into people and you learn all these different things, and you've got so many different dynamics that you get to be a part of. You know, so it's really it's kind of stimulating, but you know, at the same time, it's like on Friday, you know, I was working on projections for 2020, so there's like real work to do as well. You know, but.
Well, I gotta say, I don't want to make this a commercial for Epicentral
sure.
necessarily, but I will say I've done a lot of different co-working spaces over the years, and this is probably, and I'm not saying this just because you're sitting here, like, this is probably my favorite one, just because it's, for some reason, and maybe it's the springs, maybe it's the vibe, but like the kinds of people here, like, it's so easy just to have little casual chats, and just everybody's so chill and laid back. It's kind of nice just to, you know, mill around. That's, you know, just find somebody, you know, you'll hear some conversation, you're like, hey, and you can just join in, and it's, you know, nobody's mad about that, and you know, just have all kinds of fun little interactions. And I have new neighbors over here now who've been super nice and said hello, and so I just the culture, all that to be said, the culture you guys have kind of fostered here, you know, directly or indirectly, has really been cool to see. And especially, you know, we've talked a little bit before, Todd and I, but the Springs is going through such an interesting transition right now, and it's kind of exciting to be here at this time, you know.
Oh, definitely. We're seeing a lot of growth.
Yeah,
and I mean, we're happy to serve that growth. So.
Cool.
It's nice as they grow that, you know, as the city grows, we're growing as well. So
yeah. Well, one of the things that I do want to bring up, and I don't know how into this you are, but there is for those of you who don't live in Colorado Springs, but these even appear outside of the Springs. I should, you know, you might see them in Denver, even you might see them in other places. There is these stickers of your face that appear in coffee shops and bars and libraries and like all over the place. There's this face that's kind of like a cool kind of hip graphic designy kind of thing. And I see it everywhere. And like people, there's an Instagram page even devoted to it too, but it's your face. Do you mind telling folks kind of what that's all about in case they visit, or in case they're like, wait, I've seen that guy before. Like, what is that about?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. It's weird how it kind of just took off and became its own thing. So at Epicentral, we encourage people to do their own dishes. I had a coworker, Kayla, who wanted to remind people of that, and made a poster that said, "Let me be Frank, do your own dishes." We had a gentleman named Kevin Reed who worked out of this space who made that graphic. So they put the sign together, and then he said all he wanted for payment was a sticker of that image. So as it happened at that time, we actually had a guy in our space who worked for Sticker Mule. So we talked to him, and he was like, yeah, no problem, I can get you stickers. So printed them off, and then we got like 50 of them, and they went pretty fast. So I think we bought a few more, like Epicentral did, just to hand them out as whatever. And then Kevin just kept like designing different stickers. So there's like a St. Patrick's one, there's a Day of the Dead one, and there's like these different versions now. But the original sticker just kind of got passed around town. Then people started randomly placing it on things. And, you know, being like a former bartender, you know, I still pick up shifts here and there at different places. So I think that, you know, I've also frequent a lot of bars as well. So my sticker kind of just ended up in these different places, mostly drinking establishments and then coffee shops. And then they kind of just started popping up everywhere. And a friend of mine in Fort Collins, she started this page called Find Frank Frey. And then it is weird, right? But I mean, I've had people approach me and say like, oh, I was in Boston last week and I saw your sticker. So it has kind of gone further than the Springs. Yeah, someone told me just on Friday that they were in Chile and put one like, you know, somewhere in Chile. So it's kind of this interesting.
I love this though, because like I grew up in Wall, South Dakota, and if you know anything about that place, there's this kind of retail legend called Wall Drug, and their stickers are everywhere too. And so I moved to Colorado Springs, and before I even came to Epicentral, like my wife and I moved to Manitou, and I was seeing these faces. I was like, "What is this about?" No one ever, like, no explanation. And then I showed up here. And I'm like, oh, "That's the guy! Oh my god!" And then it was almost kind of intimidating. I'm like, well, maybe there's like, so I don't even want to say anything. Maybe that's the guy. And then I had asked you earlier on, like, you know, I was walking through, I was like, "What's that about?" And you told me the story. So it's kind of fun, man. Like, you're sort of like a meme of the city that just kind of keeps, and granted, you're a nice guy too, so like people know you outside of just the stickers, but just is kind of a cool thing is it surreal to see your face pop up in all these random spots?
A little bit. What's more surreal is when someone approaches me and they're like, hey, I have your sticker on the back of my phone and I have no idea who they are.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I understand like my friends and stuff wanting to do that, but like, for someone just to have no context of who I am, to have a sticker on like something like their phone or their computer is always kind of like, oh, well, I mean, that's cool, but it's just very interesting. And again, it's like, it's flattering that people want, to have my image, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's weird because I think people expect like a more grand story of like, oh, I was, I did this or blah, 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 or I ran for some sort of office and decided to promote it. But it really just became its own thing. Like, it's funny because I don't really hand them out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird thing.
Oh, yeah.
Now, at first I did like kind of to friends and stuff.
Sure.
But it is kind of weird to be like, oh, I know what you want. You want a sticker in my face.
Yeah.
Right. It kind of just seems like a little odd. But Kevin will print them and he has them.
Just hands them out.
Yeah, they'll hand them out. And he'll give me a stack because what'll happen now is people will ask me for them. And for a while I was like, well, I'm not. You have to ask Kevin.
Yeah.
And then they'd get mad at me and they'd be like, well, why can't I just get one from you? And it's because I literally don't have them. Kevin ordered them.
I'm the subject of the art. I am not the art.
Yeah.
Or
Also,
the artist.
it's weird. I mean, God bless Kevin, but I have no idea how much money he spent on ordering stickers. Like,
that's awesome.
And usually it's like a Sticker Mule sale.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny because I could almost track it because I'll get an email from Sticker Mule that's like, oh, $25, for 50, like sale, whatever. And then probably like within a couple hours, Kevin will text me like another image, like, this is the new version. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Still going.
Yeah.
Well, if you're interested at home, go to Find Frank Frey on Instagram, and you'll find a beautiful account of just all the examples of this out in the wild. It's been a little while since it's been updated, but I think
I don't know how current it is, but
we should re-engage that.
I was thinking about maybe really leading into it and like geotagging them.
Yeah.
Like doing like the geocache kind of thing. Yeah. But
I love it.
Seems like a lot of work.
Well, let's talk about comics. How long have you been reading? I guess like what were you as a kid? Did you jump into it? Is this something like kind of almost like me later in life? You got more into it?
Yeah, later in life I got more into it, but as a kid, I can remember being in St. Louis and I was at like a friend's family's house. They had some older boys. I was probably 8 or 9 or something like that, and these. The boys in the family were in their, I don't know, late teens. And there was just kind of that cliche, like I found a box of old comics. I found a box of old X-Men stuff. And one of the daughters at the time was reading them as well. And so, I just picked up a few and started reading them and really remember really liking it, and of course, I guess it was late 80s. But right, like Wolverine was, really badass, and I remember being like a little kid, like, oh, that's cool, it's got claws or whatever, right? And like not really, reading them out of order, not really paying attention to the storylines, but just like probably looking more at the art than anything. And then probably in junior high, I really started I started collecting more. Like at Christmas, I'd get comic books, or I'd get a gift card to a comic store. And then back then, like, my uncle gave me, he gave me the Dark Knight Returns. And he was into comics. And so I had an uncle who was really into collecting as well. And so it was cool to have kind of that, older family member, and we talk about stuff.
Nice. What did he have? What did he have in his stash? Anything really interesting?
I don't think he really had a stash, but I think he would always just talk about what he had.
Oh, sure.
And then he would collect some current stuff, but I think it was mostly just superhero stuff from the big two. And then, through high school, I was collecting, and I probably fell off, after like, I don't know, like in my junior year till, probably about 4 years ago or so. And then for some reason, I picked something up. I don't remember what it was. I think I was it like Barnes and Noble or something? I picked up like a graphic novel, just a one-off of something, some Batman story. I forgot what it was exactly. Yeah. But I remember being like, oh man, I want to read comics again. And I went to the comic book shop, and I was kind of just browsing. And I asked one of the guys, like, hey, I'm kind of just looking for something to read, and that's something maybe that might introduce me into the, into comics again or whatever. And he's like, oh, well, have you read this? And he gave me the Batman, the Court of the Owls stuff.
Oh, wow.
The Scott Snyder stuff.
Yeah.
And I read that, and I just had the trade paperback, the first one, and then I started collecting the individual issues after that. And I remember that just like sucking me back in. And I was like, oh, this is so good. And then after that, I kind of started hunting down stuff I'd always wanted to read and maybe never didn't. Like I picked up the Alan Moore run on Swamp Thing, which again was just like so mind blowing.
Oh yeah.
Started collecting. Then I just started, perusing the shelves and adding stuff to my file. And now I have more stuff than I could ever read, and it's frustrating.
That's what we're dealing with right now. Our TBR, our to be read pile is kind of out of control, and
it piles up so fast.
Well, and the problem is that we're in this sort of, just like with TV, we're in this golden age, I think, of comics right now, largely on the back of all the work done through Image, and I don't want to always pick on Image because they're just doing great work, but like there's a lot of great indie labels, Boom, all the stuff, and then what Dark Horse was doing and what they're sort of doing now under the new arrangement at DC. So there's a lot of there's so much great. It's not like before where it's like, there was in the early days of Image when it was just very stylized and very much kind of an after effect of the 80s, early 90s boom. Now we've got just these great, just amazing indie bands as comic creators and books and stuff. And it's just that alone is one thing. And then you add in like even newer stuff like Hickman's X-Men, which just concluded, like that's a mainstream title, but it's being done at that higher level. So just all of that combined with more shit coming out every month. I don't even know. I mean, how do you prioritize, or do you just kind of whatever's, tickling your fancy at that point?
I think for me, I think what's really nice is we're seeing so many great writers again, right? And I think that I remember in the 90s, like, right, with McFarlane and stuff, stuff was so artist-driven, it seemed like, and now things are becoming more writer-driven. Yeah. And I wonder if that is maybe a symptom of, like, the golden age of television where we're really craving, like, really great storylines, great character development, right? And I feel like we're seeing that in comic books. We're seeing, like, this kind of renaissance of great writing again. Yeah. And it's always so interesting to me when, like, a writer takes a property or a character that I kind of don't care about and makes me care about that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mentioned Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. What he did with that character, just blew my mind. I don't know. I was never really interested in Swamp Thing until I read that. And then I was like, oh, wow, that's like such an interesting take. Or when someone takes, a character and just tweaks just a little bit, or, you think about like what Paul Dini did with, Mr. Freeze on the animated series, where he gave that character like so much pathos and such a great backstory, right? Before he was kind of like this hokey, like, oh, I'm going to freeze you with this gun. And like there was like great motivation and stuff. So yeah, I think for me, I'm probably more drawn to writing, and I think there's also just a safety net there. I think about guys like Hickman. If something comes out, I'm probably just going to add it to my pull file, right? And just be like, you know what? I'm going to take a chance on this, and we'll see where it goes. But
Hickman's like, we've talked about this before in passing too, but Hickman's almost like Bowie. It's just like, I don't even care. I'll just take it because I know he's. And even Hickman, there are some rare misses from him, but even the misses are like interesting. You're like, wow, I didn't quite like it as much, but damn, that was still
it'll make me think about something in a different way, or it's always interesting, even just to see what happens, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes there's times where I'm like, I don't know, but then there will be something where I'm like, oh, every time there's something that happens where I'm like, oh shit, like that's amazing. Yeah. Even if the rest of it's kind of like, but he always delivers on some note.
Yeah. Well, let's start there. Did you read the most recent X-Men House of X Powers of 10 run that he did?
I did, and that just really blew my mind.
Yeah, right?
It was such an interesting take. And again, I think that's something where, how many times have these characters been used? Yeah. Right? And to be able to take something that's been just like, turned out and to do something interesting with it is really so amazing to see. But man, like the whole McTaggart stuff.
Yeah.
With, you know, like coming back in the different lives and then the different timelines and then just resetting it. I mean, there was time, like I should read it again because I know I missed stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Well, the hat trick to me was him taking all of that, all those reboots and spinoffs and stuff, and pulling it all into continuity and just having it be another one of Moira's lives that, you know, failed, and just having it's all there, like just the genius of that. So now you can go back and appreciate it all within continuity, when maybe necessarily before you weren't able to do that. So
yeah, it was a little disjointed.
Yeah, that was fascinating. What was I need to go back and reread it too, because I know there was in the release order something got a little screwy, and I think I may have read 1 or 2 out of order, or like a 10 came out before a house or something, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, when I first started reading it, I think I messed that up too, because I didn't realize that they were intertwined. You know, I was treating them as their own separate, and then at the end, like one of the first ones, like, oh yeah, okay, I got to start.
Have we talked about my theory about Hickman? Like, I feel like Hickman has this, you know, like his Stephen King Dark Tower is this character in white, and all of his books, more or less, I think since Red Mass for Mars and on, he has had this at least one character be all white, like they dress in white, they are themselves white, and it usually represents death in some way. But Magneto was that character in House of X, and I'm not quite sure. Like, it was never explained why he suddenly changed into that character, but I feel like at some point there's going to be some, you know, he's going to have some creator-owned title that pulls all these like characters in white together in some thesis. But I saw that, like, it's there. You see it in East of West, obviously, as death.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say literally.
Literally death. You see it in Black Monday Murders. There's like a white character. You see it in Dying in the Dead. Like, he's interested in this, and he may not make anything of it, but I find that the more you read Hickman, just kind of keep tabs on that, because it keeps. There was one he did oh my god, I totally forgot this. He did an amazing Avengers. It's like we've talked about it on previous episodes, but it's like an Avengers Illuminati kind of series that he did, and there was a character, like a Destroyer character, also again all white. She was there too, so it's. I'm interested to see if he's gonna make something of it, and if so, like, you know, maybe at the end of his career, if like he ties that all together Stephen King style and has something. I don't know. Keep an eye on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I really realized that until you just said that.
Oh, I said it to I told the comic shop guy at Bridge City in Portland this, and I think I broke his brain, because he immediately ran over to like they had a Hickman shelf. He's just like fishing through and looking. He's like, oh, and I was just like, I thought this was more obvious. Maybe maybe it's not something that's meant to be more obvious.
He's gonna have like a board with yarn from different comics
tied all together. Yes. Who is it? What is it? But no, just the fact that Magneto was that here, and it was like, that's interesting. Like,
that is interesting.
No reason to change your costume, but I guess. But maybe like they're doing all those. I think there are 6 now spin-off series, you know, in this new continuity.
Right.
So I'm sure it'll get addressed at some point, you know, legitimately or otherwise.
Speaking of that, East of West was another title that just the whole like reworking of history, and then breaking up, you know, the states like he did, and just. The art is that, I think that's Dragata. Yeah. I mean, and like the future, like the mix of like future and past like technologies. Yeah, that stuff really has been blowing my mind.
That was East to West for me. So Watchmen was my Court of Owls, like kind of back like into this in a major way. But East of West was like, oh, this is what they're doing now. Like I'm gonna keep tabs on both this guy and just this whole thing.
Yeah, I think East to West for me was what brought me, you know, like I got reintroduced into comics through the Court of Owls, but then again got like reintroduced to like the not so mainstream superhero genre. Yeah. And that's what really opened my mind to like, oh, okay, there's so many other stories that can be told through this medium.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we sometimes have to reframe that, right? I think we think about comics in the context of superhero stories so much that I forget that like you can tell noir, you can tell drama, you can tell horror. There's so many other genres out there that can be told through this medium.
Yeah.
And East to West for me is what really pulled me into like exploring some other, you know, genres and like looking at that whole other shelf of like, oh, this is not, the Dark Horse or Image or Boom or whatever it is.
Yeah. They just concluded. Did you finish it up, the last issue?
I have not. I need to go. It's been like a month since I pulled my files. So
it is a bigger final issue. And they don't leave anything on the table. That's all I'll say. We'll talk about it. I don't want to spoil anything for you or listeners who haven't read it yet, but it is fine. It's weird. It's surreal to think that it's finally done, because it's been running it's kind of been that constant thing in the background during my sort of re-engagement with comics, and now it's over. And I have other series I love too, so it's not like I'm hurting, but it's interesting that end of the era is finally upon us,
Yeah, agreed. It is kind of bittersweet when you finish something.
Maybe it'll give Hickman time to finish these other series, though, that he started and never ended. Like, he's got so many other things, so many irons in the fire. That's just like, dude, I don't know where you have the time to even think about any of these things, but like, he'll like start a series and just leave it for 2 years and come back maybe when he's interested in it or has time.
Yeah, it must be good work if you can get that right. Just
Seriously.
Like, hey, or you're just at the top of your game where you're like, oh, well, you know what? Yeah, we're still developing this. But I also imagine you just touch on so many different things. You have so many different storylines going through your head that, right? Sometimes you're probably thinking about like, oh, this would be great, but where do I want to put that? And what character would that relate to you best, especially if you got all these open-ended kind of...
That's a good point. He doesn't ever he can always take the best idea for the best property and not have to shoehorn it into something where it's maybe not appropriate.
Right.
That's interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah, being tied to that deadline. I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to just try to make it fit here.
Yeah. That's interesting. What other books, I guess, so we have Court of Owls, we have East to West, we have X-Men, House of X, Powers of 10. What other books or issues or series are you kind of interested in right now?
Anything, I think it's all kind of wrapped up, but I think that was related to that Black Hammer universe.
Oh, you're a Black Hammer
Lemire's
fan.
Oh man, that first run and just the parallels of the different characters to other mainstream characters that he was doing was fantastic. All the spin-off stuff that was at Sherlock Frankenstein. All that stuff was just so great because it was just like such an homage to old comic books, but such a great twist on it. And then again, Lemire is one of those guys that if he puts something out, I'm probably just going to pick it up. Right. Like, I mean, I really trust that guy a lot.
Yeah.
But man, all that, I will say, I think it was the Black Hammer 45. That didn't grab me quite as much, but yeah, all that other stuff was just super amazing, I thought. And just like, I don't know, just it was just like such a great ode to old comic book, storytelling.
I'm always a fan of taking approximations of characters we know and playing with them. Like, I mean, I sound like a broken damn record, but like Watchmen for me was like, it really showcased all this kinds of stuff, which is like, look, you have these amalgams in the Watchmen universe of stuff that but we're doing something completely new and interesting with it that, you may not be able to do in a Superman book. Although more of that's happening. Like it's almost like that used to be the safe space for kind of experimentation, kind of these indie titles or these sort of Elseworlds titles. I'm seeing that more and more bleed into the real, I mean, X-Men obviously, like we just talked about, but I mean, even like Superman, American Alien, I don't know if you read that series. Just a great, I mean, it does all these little interesting things with Clark Kent's life over the years. And obviously you're seeing it with Batman, but just so many.
Was that the Max Landis?
Yes.
Yeah. I did read that. That was really good.
Some people don't like it as much as I mean, I've always been sort of a wait and see Superman fan. Like, I don't know. It just seems like everything's been done. And then I read that. I was like, oh my God, to actually humanize like the growth of Clark Kent and make it not so obvious that, in all the other movies and TV and properties and comics and stuff, like he's given the sort of the keys to the kingdom very quickly. It's like, hey, this is your destiny. And in that series, he had to figure it out basically all on his own. He had to figure out what is my costume going to be, and he's trying different iterations. And who's Batman? Like this Bruce Wayne guy, what's he about? Like,
how do I feel about him?
Yeah, it was just so cool to see. So you're seeing all this experimentation, and probably I don't know if you've read Tom King's Mr. Miracle or Vision runs. Holy crap!
That's funny because I wanted to talk about the Mr. Miracle stuff.
Perfect. Yay! Oh man, I could talk about Mr. Miracle for a long.
It was
forever.
So good. Like, again, taking some of those older properties that was it Jack Kirby's New God stuff, right?
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, kind of adding some humanity to it, even.
Yeah.
Man, and they just the big Barda and Scott relationship just all that stuff. Just
Okay, so I have a theory about this book, and I'm curious. And I'm not. It's one of those. They leave it open ended enough where you can have different, equally legitimate interpretations. But as I read it through a second time, I was like, man, I think he died, and I think what we're seeing is his entire like afterlife. And I say this because if you go back, and I forget, Todd and I have talked about this before, but there's one of those pages where he's on the talk show. You know, because they like each chapter kind of starts with him escaping from something, and then it almost like a flashback sort of, and it cuts in.
Right.
There's one where, and they keep showing him, and he keeps escaping. They keep showing him, and he keeps escaping. And towards the end, there's one where he's gonna be burned alive on like some kind of like Johnny Carson kind of talk show, and it doesn't show him escaping, and it just cuts. And I'm like, maybe he died there, and everything we're seeing is him sort of having to choose or kind of try to will into existence an afterlife, but he's a child of like, you know, Earth and apocalypse, and so he's got this almost like heaven and hell kind of skewed idea of what existence should be, and so he's going to kind of straddle those. I don't know. It doesn't have to be that, but it's you read it and you're like, man, I wonder if this is kind of like, there's definitely a Jacob's Ladder sort of through line going through the whole thing, but just I keep thinking that we're just seeing his. Like, and you know, some of those characters, they're like blurred, you know, they're almost like TV static blur in and out of the frame, or there's something kind of not quite right about them, and you don't know. I mean,
yeah, it was like a little phazed out.
Yeah,
and the art again was so great on that, and the way they conveyed.
Oh God.
So, yeah, some of those concepts through, I think, kind of that blurry vision, or kind of that weird.
That pulsing
effect.
dark side that keeps popping in, you know,
Yeah.
And especially like I read it. We talk about this all the time too, but I read it first on Comixology, and then I ended up getting the hardcover just for collector's purposes. So I've read it in both physical and digital. And the physical, like you see those panels pop in, but on the digital, it's like you keep swiping, you just keep seeing like dark side is, and then so it's a very different kind of experience. It's almost more like a TV show when you're doing it on Comixology. But they nail that pacing in, and just those. There's sort of a weird, off-putting, not dread, but just kind of feeling through the whole thing that I didn't think I would like it nearly as much as I did, and I almost like it more than Vision, and I love Vision, which
I would agree with that. I wasn't. Again, I think that's one of those characters, and even that whole like the New God stuff. Yeah, I'm semi-familiar with it, but not. You know, it's kind of its own thing, right? I don't think I'm as familiar with it. It's probably like hardcore comic book fans.
Yeah.
Right, and that it was nice to see some of those characters pop up and have, you know, these storylines that I could follow. And, you know, I think like for me, right, like Darkseid kind of pops in and out of the DC universe, but I've never really like followed him or know much about him, or, you know, even Apocalypse, right? Like I understand that, but I'm not like well versed in all that.
I got most of same. I mean, I watched those DC animated cartoons that used to be on all the time and gleamed, you know, Justice League Unlimited and all that stuff. But this was the first book where I actually feel like, oh, now I understand Apocalypse more. Right. They really delve into it.
Yeah, like, with them growing up under Granny and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, okay, got it. So I kind of came into it like, a little bit, well, I'm a little uneducated in this.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, I was just stunned. I mean, just absolutely jaw-dropping.
Well, and shout out to Escape Velocity Comics down the street. They actually had it as their book club pick last year, which is what forced me to finally I'm like, all right, because I want to talk about it. So I read it, and it's just like, oh my God, I like this so much more than I realized I would. So cool. Mr. Miracle. Did you read the Tom King's Vision at all?
I didn't.
You should. I should loan you my copy. It's pretty. If you liked Mr. Miracle, this is a similar kind of taking a character you think you know and just making it super, very grounded and very, very human and very real. And I was equally shocked by the ending of that one too.
Tom King's one of those guys I wasn't really super familiar with. And then he just did the last run on Batman.
Yeah.
I think which was really I thought really great. And then Mr. Miracle. But the stuff I've read by him I really enjoy. But again, I kind of didn't really recognize his name. I wasn't really sure who he was. And then I think Mr. Miracle is what really like made me pay attention. Like, okay, this guy, he's kind of becoming one of my favorite writers. Based on
very cool. Stuff. Did you end up watching? You watched the HBO Watchmen?
I did. I haven't finished it though.
You haven't?
No, I know.
I shouldn't say anything more than
everybody keeps asking me about it, and for whatever reason, like I think I'm 2 episodes shy. I forget what happened, but I just lost momentum somewhere, and I need to go back and finish it up.
Yeah.
And then it's like I just need to find the time to go sit down and do that.
Yeah.
So it's a little frustrating because, everybody, it's one of those no spoiler kind of situations.
Yeah.
And so people will be talking about it, and I'm like, I got to cover my ears and run out of the room. So
you like what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I really do. I love what they've done with those characters. I think it's always interesting to see someone take characters or storyline and go beyond and put their own twist on, like, oh, this is what happened later or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think they're doing a really great job of it. I think the world setting, the place setting, they did an awesome job. Tackling the social issues they're tackling, right? I was reading something they were talking about the original comic when it came out at its time. The big thing was, right, obviously, like nuclear disarmament, nuclear war, whatever. The atomic clock played a big part in that, and that this series really seems to be tackling, like, race relations, right, and like that division of just race.
Yeah, and
I think they're doing a really great job of exploring that through these characters. Like the kind of the new group of I don't know, superheroes, if you want to call them that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, we did a wrap up on that on our Panelism Watching sub series. So check that out if you're interested, if you just finished, or if you just don't care and you want to spoil yourself. Todd and I kind of geek out about the ending, and it is. I will say this without spoiling anything for you. It is one of the best endings to a television series I think I've ever seen. Just in terms of how, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, but like I was a big Lost fan, and I feel like Lost just crapped the bed at the end. And so like Lindelof had a lot to answer for in terms of just making sure he could finish what he started. And oh my God, it was almost like it's like he heard all that criticism, went, all right, if you watch this. And it was just like, oh my God. So it's to see it kind of all come together, all these threads, and every single thread except for one or two, which were answered, and kind of, they had remember how like in Watchmen, they had those at the end of each issue, there was like a newspaper article or something, or like an excerpt from Hollis Mason's book. They actually have like a companion Wikipedia like webpage for the series called PDpedia, which is that guy who is accompanies Laurie Blake to Tulsa. He's kind of like he's
like the historian.
Yeah. So, but he explained like anything that wasn't addressed in the finale is addressed in PDpedia. So there's like two little things that weren't as important, but they even addressed that there. So I'm waiting for my wife to get time so I can go back and rewatch it now, start to finish, because there's so much I missed even, the first time through. I was just like, now that I know kind of where they're headed, just to see things that were there, hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, there was a lot of like hesitancy, right, with Lindelof. Like, is he gonna deliver on this?
Yeah.
Because so many people were so burned by Lost.
Or Tomorrowland, or just any of those. I never watched The Leftovers, I think, and some people did and loved it. So there was definitely an upswing, but this is going to cement him as like, the fact that he pulled this off at all, but to pull it off at a high level was just, it was surprising. It was satisfying. I can't wait to see what he does next.
I feel that way about Frank Miller. You never know if he's going to finish something, right? Okay.
Have you, speaking of him, have you gotten into any of the recent, like Dark Knight 3, Dark Knight 4, any of that stuff?
I have. I read even the last one, The Golden Child.
Yeah.
Which I thought was okay, but it definitely doesn't have the impact as, Strikes Again or Returns.
Were you a big Strikes Again fan?
I actually was.
Interesting.
I really enjoyed that a lot. And I think I enjoyed that because I really love Plastic Man and, having him pull him into the universe. And then, he brought in the Green Arrow. So I kind of liked that he played with a few more characters as well. But yeah, I really, I thought that was really great. I enjoyed it almost as much as Returns.
It's an interesting book because like Returns is kind of held up as like this, like, as one of the holy texts of the comic.
Seminal.
And then you get Strikes Again, which is like, it's interesting because it's a little rougher, in terms of the animation.
It seems rushed for sure.
Yeah, but then what people don't realize is that he was writing that, and then 9/11 happened like right in the middle of his run, and it changed both his his thoughts on what the story should be, but just also his outlook on the world in general. You'll see like a tonal shift in that series. You're just like, what the hell happened? 9/11 happened. I think they even have a panel, if I'm not of like Supergirl or somebody looking on, and like something in New York is like not the Twin Towers necessarily, but something's, burning or blowing up or something crazy. So it changes, but I like, who was it that said, Grant Morrison in some podcast said, like, look, man, it's like he had his like number one, he had his like White Album, right? And then it's like, you can't do that every time, but you still get like this point of view of this guy, of this artist, and they should just be taken on that level. And, I think it's cool for those reasons.
I enjoyed it though. What I really enjoyed was that All-Star Batman that he started writing.
Oh yeah.
And then like issue 8 just it disappeared.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's off writing stuff for the Sin City movie.
Yeah.
The sequel or whatever.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed. I actually really liked it. I know it got a lot of criticism because people didn't really enjoy it, or he was kind of painting Batman as like a child abductor, taking Dick Grayson.
But hey, that's an angle. Like, people have asked that question. They've thought it either privately or publicly before. So it's like, let's talk. Let's think through that. What would that be like?
Yeah, I think we're so quick to have our set ideas about what these characters are, even though they're displaying. Right? I mean, Bruce Wayne is mentally unwell, right? Like, that's not a normal reaction to grief or or tragedy.
Yeah.
So why not play around with that?
Yeah.
I think sometimes we're so quick to hold things so sacred.
Yeah.
I think honestly, to explore that further, like, fandom is so wild right now to me that like you have to really understand the nitty gritty of things for people to like recognize you as a fan. You can't kind of casually like things anymore, right?
Yeah.
Like, which I think is this really like just interesting dynamic of this super fan, or like, you don't really like that if you don't know who, scored the second episode of whatever it is. And it's like, well, I mean, I think I enjoyed it. Like,
yeah.
I
got to be careful with that too, because I'm a big Doctor Who fan. And like, I get really into the nitty gritty, and I have friends who are just like, they love the show, but they're just, casual, like almost civilian fans. Right.
Right.
And so I'll be like, that was like the top, and they reference this from this. And I all the canon and stuff that's in my head isn't necessarily in there. So they're appreciating it at one level. We're still appreciating it, but just that deeper dive. But then that deeper, what do you think? I'm glad you brought this up. What do you think though? Does that sort of, that layer of fandom that is so detailed and so hyper contextual, I feel like create situations like they'll put out, one Star Wars movie and people are like, it was great, but it was a lot like the original ones. And they'll go, okay. They'll put out a second Star Wars movie and it's very different, very new. And people are like, it's too new. It's too different. It's like, okay. They'll put out a third Star Wars movie that's kind of like everything in I call it the kitchen sink Star Wars, because it was just like everything. And people are like, no, I mean, just you create a situation where just people are never happy. I don't know. I sometimes go back to like IO9 comment sections, or there's a few Reddit channels I'm following and participating in now and then, and I just find myself sometimes going, man, we may have gone too far in that direction, because it's just like, I think people are so particular about some things that it kind of, even to the creators watching, they get in this kind of like feedback loop of like, well, we have to make the thing for those fans, and they're almost going too far to accommodate everybody at such a base level that the whole thing suffers. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I think fan service is always great, to be honest. I think it's, awesome to pull from the deep cuts and honor them as well. But I think you can overdo it sometimes. And I think it's probably just an issue of balance. But also it's an issue of you're not going to please everybody.
Yeah.
And now, because of the internet, everybody has a voice. So, and everybody feels validated, which is great. I mean, I think it's great that we all believe that our voice carries weight. I think of a situation like Game of Thrones where like they were starting like the petition for them to rewrite.
Redo the season.
Yeah, and you're like, hold on. You don't get to do that. Like, they created this thing, and you can enjoy it or not, but like to make a demand as a fan that you go
do it
back.
again.
Right. Like, they don't work for you. I mean, they do in some regard, but to me, that's a little like,
Well, there's still fans who are like petitioning to get the original Scott Snyder Justice League cut released, and I'm like, is it going to be? I mean, as though it contains some kind of secret that like we all need to see it because it was he was silenced, and I'm like, it's probably really not that much different than what we got. Maybe just a slightly different order, but it's not like it's a whole new movie sitting in a vault somewhere that just like I find it fascinating that it's like if it's not. And yeah, there's, love it or hate it. I had some issues with it, but it exists. It's there. If you don't like it, wait 5 years. Somebody will try it again.
Yeah, it'll get rebooted. Everything else is getting rebooted, right? Yeah, I think it's interesting that we feel like we can demand those things, and I think we have to remember though, we're really lucky right now.
Yeah.
As geek culture, nerd culture's just taken over media, right? We are so lucky that these things get to exist at all.
Yeah.
And I think we forget that, right? You have, 1989, Tim Burton makes Batman.
Yeah.
That no one thought that was ever going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. And man, what a great experience to have that happen. And now it just happens all the time. And we're so used to it that we're kind of taking these things for granted, I think. And, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we should just be grateful that this stuff exists and we get to see these things go from the page to the screen at all.
Can you imagine if the internet in its full glory existed in 1989 when they said and they're like, we're gonna make Batman and we're gonna cast Michael Keaton, who up to that point
was like a Mr. Mom, right?
And just a comedy actor, and that's it, right? And just imagine just the outrage and he would have been shouted into assisted suicide or something. It would have been so.
It would have been like Donald Glover and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
But now a lot of people look at Michael Keaton as like their favorite Batman, and it's like, give it a chance to. And at the time, it was all we had, so everybody just kind of loved it just on principle. But now it's like you get, Christ, like every 2 years there's a new Batman and something. But just the idea that for the record, I love fan service too. Like I think two great examples. I don't know if you've started watching Mandalorian yet. I finally picked that up last weekend, and it's interesting to contrast Mandalorian with the latest Star Wars movie, which I think both of them offer fan service in spades, but The Mandalorian, it's like deep cut fan service. So it's like it's stuff that you may not have seen before, that if you had watched an episode of like the Rebels animated series, they'll throw a name or a thing in Mandalorian that those people will go, oh, but someone like me who my Star Wars is probably, I'm probably more of a casual civilian fan. So I know enough, but I don't go that deep. But just like I'll see something, go, well, that's just cool, right? But I don't feel like they're trying to orient or jeopardize the story just to facilitate
this something in.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's like it's more like layering on top of a great idea. Whereas the Rise of Skywalker almost had to be a certain thing just to make sure this guy's in it and this guy is in it and this happens, and it's just like they almost had those things that made the story conform to that instead of the other way. I don't know. But we do. To your point, like we have so much. It's kind of hard to complain about anything because it's just like, dude, if you don't like that, there's 20 other things right now that are probably exactly what you want. So just hang tight. You'll be
all these properties are being made into TV shows or series or movies. There's something out there for you.
Yeah. Here's a great question. What one, if you could pick one series or comic or graphic novel that would be turned into either a show or movie, what would be top of your list?
Oh man.
You can ponder that too if you.
Yeah, let me come back to that. That's a great question.
I ask because Todd and I, when we do episodes, often I should say, there are books that I'll immediately say, oh, this could be a series instantly. Like favorite example of mine is Postal, which is now doing like a sequel series, which I find interesting. But like that whole book, that whole run is like, it's just built for TV. Like even the panels look like almost like storyboards. It could easily be and should easily be a series. And there's just, I almost wonder, a lot of those image and just kind of creator owned titles, I'm not saying they're written for this purpose, but it's like as they're coming out, I'm like, man, this would be so easy to adapt without and not even have to do any heavy lifting. It's just like, just do this, just do the book.
Which unfortunately doesn't happen a lot, right?
I know, yeah.
That stuff seems so spelled out.
Yeah.
But I wonder too, there's got to be something as a creator where you take a property, you want to put your own twist on it, kind of make your own mark on it, right? But still honor the material. But sometimes you're like, hey, all you got to do is follow that. And that
just
was
literally do it.
Yeah. Panel for panel, right? But I guess that happens and then people get mad about that.
Yeah.
Right?
They didn't do anything new. They just did the book. It's like, well, what do you want, man?
Although when 300 came out, that's pretty much what they did with that.
Yeah. That's a great
people
example.
Being blown away by that, right? People are like, oh, it's like shot for shot from the graphic novel. Sin
City tried really hard.
They did.
Rodriguez knows what he's doing.
Man, that first movie, I actually really enjoyed that.
It's good.
It was. I remember buying that on Blu-ray, and then I just consumed it in all of its entirety. All the commentary, just all the bonus, everything. And I probably watched that movie, I don't know, like 8 times.
Wow.
In 2 weeks or something like that. It was insane.
Robert Rodriguez shot that in his barn, like the whole thing.
Yeah.
In his barn in Austin, because it's mostly green screen, and they built, I think, like 2 practical sets. One for the like the lounge where Jessica Alba dances, and then I think like a house. But otherwise, it was all green screen and blue screen in his barn. And I was just like, that's. I mean, that was like 2005, 6, something like that. That's just so cool. That guy.
Yeah, that he would take that on, and then he gave Frank Miller like a director credit.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and then
yeah.
Didn't he? I think did he get kicked out of like the director's guild or something for that?
Yeah.
I mean, great, right? That's awesome that he again. There was so much fan service there, and he wanted to like bring in the original creator to help him out with it. So much so, like to his detriment, right?
Yeah. Well, let's jump to. I want to do something in each of these fireside chats. We're going to do a little lightning round, and these are just a series of questions that I'm personally interested in, but I think listeners will get a kick out of too. We'll just try to give me as quick an answer as you can. Some of these Frank has seen some of these he hasn't, and we'll just kind of crank through these. He-Man or G.I. Joe?
He-Man.
Excellent. Favorite Ghostbuster?
Probably Peter Venkman.
Peter Venkman. Now, sub question: movie Peter Venkman or cartoon Peter Venkman, or does it matter?
Oh, that's interesting. Probably both. You know what? That cartoon. I want to go back and watch that because if I remember, there was like some really like kind of crazy, like trippy stuff that would happen in that cartoon.
It was psychedelic, man.
Yeah, like it was a kid's cartoon, but I remember it being like, kind of a little trippy and like, whoa, this is weird.
It was at a different level. Best Batman in any medium.
Any medium? This is going to be probably a really nerdy answer, but probably Kevin Conroy.
Yeah. That's not a nerdy. That's a legit answer, man. He's kind of the gold standard in a lot of people's minds.
I think so. That's the voice you hear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's great.
That animated series just impacted me so much.
Oh, dude.
I mean, I was already a Batman fan, and then I think there's so much of that stuff that's untouchable. Mm-hmm. And also like how great it is that some of that's made it into like canon. Like, I mean, you think about like a character like Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
That was kind of like this, like, we're going to include, Paul Dini was like, here's a character that we'll include in this animated series. And now, like, she's everywhere.
Movie coming out and everything. Yeah.
Insane.
And sometimes more popular than even the Joker, depending on who you talk to.
For sure.
Favorite Marvel movie?
Favorite Marvel movie?
You can pick two if you need to.
I think that first Iron Man,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's my favorite. It might be though, but it just captured, it was so wild to me that they made that movie, right? I don't know if people, I think comic book fans realize this, but like that was like a D-list character in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
And they picked Iron Man to make this movie that's going to launch all these future titles.
With an actor who, by the way, was not a household name and was kind of like known as like a just total a fuck up.
Yeah, he was in and out of jail. He was in and out of rehab. Which again, I think maybe if you know anything about the original Tony Stark character, kind of plays all right. He's an alcoholic and he's in the arc reactor to keep himself alive for a while. You know what movie I really love? Spider-Man 2. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man 2. Mm-hmm. He did such a great job with Dr. Octopus.
Yeah. Alfred Molina is the perfect guy to play that character.
Yeah. And I think Tobey Maguire was a great Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. I know we all kind of forget about
He was wonderful.
Yeah, he's kind of this nerdy kid. That's what I want out of my Spider-Man. Yeah. Right? Just like a nerdy Peter Parker who's wondering if he's going to pass calculus.
Yeah. Independence Day or Men in Black?
Ooh. Yeah. Probably Men in Black.
Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite comic book shop, and you can say multiple ones if you like.
My favorite comic book shop is probably Chicago Comics, off of Clark Street.
I haven't heard of that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, and it's off of like Clark Street, like I said, but it used to be around, like there was this place called the Alley there. There's all these really cool, like kind of just maybe counterculture stores. But it was a huge store. They had a bunch of like statuettes and just huge comic book selection. Wow. And I can remember going there early teenager and just being always blown away by like how much stuff they have. And it was just really cool.
I'm pulling up pictures now for those of you listening. Go to Google and look it up. It is, next time I'm in Chicago, that is on my list of places to visit. Wow.
Yeah, it's such a great store. I mean, also too, it's just cool people working there. You could bring up whatever title you want. And you're never going to get like the eye roll or, like, oh, do you really read this?
Yeah. Yeah. I love. See, that's honestly that the mark of any great shop is just somebody who's almost like a bartender, like a sommelier. Like, well, what are you interested in? And they,
for sure.
They don't give you. They're not Jack Black from High Fidelity, just judging you at all.
Right. You can ask that question. Yeah, like, what are you reading? Like, you wouldn't understand that.
Yeah. Best song from the '80s.
Best song from the '80s. Phew, that's a good question too. You know what? I really love Space Age Love Song.
Oh, by Flock of Seagulls.
Yeah.
Good.
If I could tie it to a video, though.
Yeah.
Love is a Battlefield. Have you ever watched that video with Pat Benatar?
It's been a while, but yeah.
Watch it. It's pretty mind blowing. She like leaves her parents' house and like joins a brothel, and then the prostitutes fight the pimp. It's a whole
wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting.
I just remember that at the end, like the sunset, and they're all like dancing down the street.
Yeah.
I never remember like how they got to that, like what led them there. And then finally, because you're a bartender, I guess, do you have a favorite cocktail or something that you would recommend to listeners?
Man, a favorite cocktail of mine. I'm not really drinking a lot of cocktails right now. I'm kind of just enjoying things neat and on their own. And honestly, one of the things, it's kind of funny, but one of the things I drink on its own a lot right now is Carpano, which is a sweet vermouth. And it's kind of a nice little after dinner drink. And then I'm always fascinated with, there's two drinks. The French 75, I think, is just a great drink. You could enjoy it, on your front porch. It hits all the notes, right? It's gin, lemon, sugar, and champagne. So it's got the nice texture of the champagne. And then it's sour and sweet, but also has some of the nice undertones of the gin. And then like the original Mai Tai, with the rum and the orgeat syrup. That again, I think just hits on all the notes. And also what a great story, because what that drink is originally and what it has become known as with all the fruit juice and like, the orange juice and the grenadine and stuff, in the return of, speaking of like fandom, I mean, cocktails are, right now there's this big renaissance in craft cocktails, right? And going back to if you don't know the original recipe for whatever drink and you can't track it down in a 1925 cocktail book, then you must not really be a bartender. There's a whole
wow.
subset of that going on.
That's cool.
It's pretty interesting. And sometimes it's a little out of balance, but I think that's a really wonderful drink as well.
Very good. Well, it's been fun, Frank. We could talk for far longer, and I'm sure we'll find ways to talk to you again in the future. Is there anything you want to promote, either yourself or anything you're working on or looking at, or just anything?
I mean, nothing that I'm really working on right now. I'd say if you're ever in the Springs area and need office space, come to Epicentral, of course. Or if you're ever just in the area, just stop by and say hi. I'm picking up Fridays over at Chiba Bar.
Nice.
Speaking of nerd culture, they always have like anime and stuff on their televisions.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's
go there next.
Even the name of it, Chiba Bar, comes from that book, The Neuromancer.
Mm-hmm.
And the owner's a big like fantasy sci-fi buff.
Holy crap! I didn't know any of this.
Yeah, it's pretty
good
cool.
Shout out.
I've probably watched, Blade Runner 18 times on shift just because there's one TV that almost plays it all the time. Or, if you're in the area, check that out. And also the food is amazing. So they're doing like, maybe not traditional sushi, but like more like Donburi bowls and stuff like that.
Okay.
And the chef back there just crushes it. So I think it's some of the best food in town, actually. But other than that, nothing that I'm working on personally.
Wow. Well, that's a pretty good shout out right there.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, sir. Really appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to get more great content like this, go to panelism.inc. That's www.panelism.ink. We're also panelism.inc on Instagram. If you like what you heard, please share with a friend. Let them know about the show, and let us know if there's any book or guest you want to see featured in a next episode. We'll be back next week. Todd and I will have a brand new episode where we'll talk more. And until then, hey, happy reading. Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.